Whenever I'm talking about Ploughshares actions to people, invariably they think of prison, and that's the frightening thought, and that's what stops them and quite often disempowers them. And I think it's really important to get over that it's a disarmament process which is not just about disarming nuclear weapons and military machines, but it's about disarming our own fears. Our action was the first Ploughshares action to take place in Britain, but in the worldwide Ploughshares community it was about the 40th. It's part of the Ploughshares movement, which is a movement that began in the States about 10 years ago. And we take our inspiration from the Jewish prophets Isaiah and Micah, who write of beating swords into ploughshares. As we explored the movement years ago, we found out it's a loosely knit movement of pretty ordinary people, and they take their fears and their courage in hand and go and enact disarmament. And it slowly and alarmingly dawned on me that I was just as capable of doing an action like this as anyone else.
We entered USAF Upper Heyford base in Oxfordshire on the first day of spring this year, and hammered directly on an F-111E nuclear-capable bomber.
Well, Upper Heyford is really at the centre of the Western military economic strategy. It's a US base. It's one of the 160 US bases and facilities in Britain. The F-111 planes there are what's called dual capable, which means they can carry both conventional weapons and nuclear weapons. And they're just as capable of bombing Tripoli or Benghazi with conventional weapons as they are of flying, say, to the Soviet Union and dropping nuclear bombs or firing nuclear missiles. So it's at the heart of the war machine. In 1986, planes from Upper Heyford were actually used to bomb Libya, attack in which about 100 civilians were murdered. So they're not just planes, and it's not just a threat of the future. Upper Heyford is a place of war crimes which have already happened. The lead-up was quite a long one. We took about a year preparing this action. I don't know, that's a mixture of caution and cowardice, and I think it was worthwhile caution. So we spent a good year meeting for weekends, for weeks, talking about the action from every angle, from the political angle, from spiritual angle, all sorts of things, until we felt we were ready. The worst consequence would be getting shot. I mean, when you enter these bomb factories and nuclear bases, they're serious, they're guarded, they're authorised to use lethal force, as they call it. So that was one consequence we had to face. The other most obvious one is prison. In the States, people have got up to 18 years in prison for actions like these. We don't expect we'll get that high a sentence here, but we're looking at a few years in prison.
One of the advantages of having been around the base already on St. Valentine's Day was that we'd been able to see every inch of the perimeter fence, so we knew exactly where we were going to get in. And Stephen cut through the fence with bolt cutters, and we found ourselves then in a large building compound, the gate of which, further on inside, was very high off the ground, so we could easily slip under that, and we found ourselves in the main base. We approached one hangar which had its doors slightly open. Now, this was very early in the morning, about 2:30 or so, and we had imagined there wouldn't be anyone around, but there was plenty of traffic. presumably maintenance crew or whatever. And as we were just about to crawl into the front door, as it were, the huge concrete things, a maintenance vehicle went past us, almost past our noses, into the same hangar. So we had to back off very rapidly. We had to decide at this point whether to go back to the hangar we had been looking at to see if there was something in it, or to go for an F-111 we could see actually on the lit up tarmac in the middle of the runway. And Stephen persuaded me, as it were, that we should go for the one we could see, because that was the easiest target, although perhaps the most nerve-wracking, to have to walk 100 meters or so across the runway. I think the whole process that we'd been going through the 12 months previously had been a process of overcoming fears. And that process for me was going on right up until that very second. But once we'd started walking towards the plane, I became very centered and just concentrated on the work I had to do, which was to approach the plane and disarm it.
When we decided upon the plane, we put on our camouflage wear because we knew the armed guards would be much more likely and willing to shoot people who obviously looked like terrorists than two people who looked like a pair of jokers. So we put on these big white sheets which read Mickey Mouse Club, brackets, peace section, close brackets, and we put on a pair of Mickey Mouse ears.
We had done some research and Stephen knew exactly how to get in. We had a very good book which told you how to open F-111 cockpit doors, and sure enough he pressed this button and pulled the lever and it opened, which was my signal to start hammering on a bomb pylon which holds the various bombs, missiles or fuel tanks or whatever.
They'd conveniently left the ladder up to the plane, so I didn't have to do anything too gymnastic or acrobatic. And the cockpit door just slid open surprisingly easy. It was a bit like out of a sort of storybook. And I looked inside this sort of pokey little cockpit and it didn't look as spacious as I thought it would. And I climbed in, I sat in the navigator's seat, I kind of swallowed, looked at the dials and started hitting. We decided not to wreck the plane, but just to symbolically disarm it. So the bits I hit were the bomb sight, which is above the pilot's position. It's kind of glass and that's shattered, and also the radar screen and part of the attack radar scope screen. And after I'd disarmed several of the dials, Mike came in and he smashed the nuclear weapons control panel. I left various photographs of friends and friends' children just to put a sort of human face towards the victims of war, and left a piece of the Berlin Wall. It was a very sort of appropriate image that some property like Berlin Walls doesn't have any right to exist, just as some property like nuclear weapons doesn't have any right to exist. And we left a ripped up copy of the INF Treaty, Grassroots Disarmament Treaty, and our own personal statements. By which time, the American cavalry had surrounded the plane and were asking us to get out.
They were armed, as usual, and they led us off, told us to put our arms in the air. And at that point, as we were led off, we both felt absolutely wonderful, joyous that we'd actually been able to carry it out. They were actually privileged to have been able to do that. And so we walked away, arms in the air, holding hands and singing, and everyone neath their vine in victory. And it was a wonderful feeling.
Acts of non-violent resistance are also acts of great celebration. We were trying to say that the human family is worth looking after. We were just trying to show that rather than place our faith in the sort of governmental false disarmament, which has achieved precious little in the last 45 years other than a horrific arms build-up, we placed our faith and our hope in sort of ordinary grassroots action, just as a lot of the regimes were overturned in East Germany by popular pressure and uprising. Then we look towards that sort of grassroots vision over here. The prophet Micah enfleshes the vision very beautifully, and if there's any words or verses which would I'd claim as my religious political manifesto, it would be his. And they shall beat their swords into ploughshares and spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not wage war against nation, nor prepare for war any more. But everyone will sit underneath their vine and fig tree, and none shall make them afraid. So it's a vision not just of disarmament, it's a vision of economic justice, where people can enjoy the fruits of their labour. And it's such a beautiful vision. I don't know if we'll ever see that world in my lifetime, but we've got to work towards it.
The charge runs that they committed criminal damage without lawful excuse, and the leeway is to argue that they did have legal excuse, that they were preventing, for instance, that they were acting to prevent a crime, a worse crime than that of committing criminal damage, the sort of crime that might be committed by if this F-111 had taken off with nuclear weapons and dropped them.
And for those of you who weren't at the entertainments last night, me and Mike would just like to do a brief summary of our defence. It was him. Whatever happens in court over the next couple of days, you know, we may be steamrollered, we may be patronised, we may be sent down for 5 years, we may be acquitted. Whatever happens, in a way that's a sideline, because all the important work's going on in peace groups on the streets, at the military bases and stuff, all around the world. And that's really heartening. And thank you very much. Yay. We all have the power to disarm. If we can communicate that, then I'll be happy.